Chapter 14 of the Talisman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. All my long arrear of honour lost, heaped up in youth and hoarded up for age, hath honour's fountain then sucked up the stream? He hath, and hooting boys may barefoot pass and gather pebbles from the naked ford. Don Sebastian. After a torrent of afflicting sensations, by which he was at first almost stunned and confounded, Sir Kenneth's first thought was to look for the authors of this violation of the English banner, but in no direction could he see traces of them. His next, which to some persons, but scarce to any who have made intimate acquaintances among the canine race, may appear strange, was to examine the condition of his faithful Roswal, mortally wounded, as it seemed, in discharging the duty which his master had been seduced to abandon. He caressed the dying animal, who, faithful to the last, seemed to forget his own pain in the satisfaction he received from his master's presence, and continued wagging his tail and licking his hand, even while, by low moanings, he expressed that his agony was increased by the attempts which Sir Kenneth made to withdraw from the wound the fragment of the lance or javelin with which it had been inflicted, then redoubled his feeble endearments, as if fearing he had offended his master by showing a sense of the pain to which his interference had subjected him. There was something in the display of the dying creature's attachment which mixed as a bitter ingredient with the sense of disgrace and dissolution by which Sir Kenneth was oppressed. His only friend seemed removed from him, just when he had incurred the contempt and hatred of all besides. The knight's strength of mind gave way to a burst of agonized distress, and he groaned and wept aloud. While he thus indulged his grief, a clear and solemn voice, close beside him, pronounced these words in the sonorous tone of the readers of the mosque, and in the lingua franca mutually understood by Christians and Saracens: "Adversity is like the period of the former and of the latter rain, cold, comfortless, unfriendly to man and to animal. Yet from that season have their birth the flower and the fruit, the date, the rose, and the pomegranate." Sir Kenneth of the Leopard turned towards the speaker, and beheld the Arabian physician, who, approaching unheard, had seated himself a little behind him cross-legged, and uttered with gravity, yet not without a tone of sympathy, the moral sentences of consolation with which the Koran and its commentators supplied him. For in the East, wisdom is held to consist less in a display of the sage's own inventive talents than in his ready memory and happy application of and reference to that which is written. Ashamed at being surprised in a womanlike expression of sorrow, Sir Kenneth dashed his tears indignantly aside, and again busied himself with his dying favourite. "The poet hath said," continued the Arab, without noticing the knight's averted look and sullen deportment, "the ox for the field and the camel for the desert. Were not the hand of the leech fitter than those of the soldier to cure wounds, though less able to inflict them?" "This patient, Hakim, is beyond thy help," said Sir Kenneth, "and besides, he is, by thy law, an unclean animal." "Where Allah hath deigned to bestow life, and a sense of pain and pleasure," said the physician, "it were sinful pride should the sage, whom he has enlightened, refuse to prolong existence or assuage agony. To the sage, the cure of a miserable groom, or a poor dog, and of a conquering monarch, are events of little distinction. Let me examine this wounded animal." Sir Kenneth acceded in silence, and the physician inspected and handled Roswal's wound with as much care and attention as if he had been a human being. He then took forth a case of instruments, and, by the judicious and skilful application of pincers, withdrew from the wounded shoulder the fragment of the weapon, and stopped with styptics and bandages the effusion of blood which followed. the creature all the while suffering him patiently to perform these kind offices, as if he had been aware of his kind intentions. "The animal may be cured," said El Hakim, addressing himself to Sir Kenneth, "if you will permit me to carry him to my tent, and treat him with the care which the nobleness of his nature deserves. For know, that thy servant Adonbec is no less skilful in the race and pedigree and distinction of good dogs and of noble steeds than in the diseases which afflict the human race." "Take him with you," said the knight. "I bestow him on you freely, if he recovers. I owe thee a reward for attendance on my squire, and have nothing else to pay it with. For myself, I will never again wind bugle or halloo to hound." The Arabian made no reply, but gave a signal with a clapping of his hands, which was instantly answered by the appearance of two black slaves. He gave them his orders in Arabic, received the answer that to hear was to obey, when, taking the animal in their arms, they removed him, without much resistance on his part, for though his eyes turned to his master, he was too weak to struggle. "Fare thee well, Roswal, then," said Sir Kenneth. "Fare thee well, my last and only friend. Thou art too noble a possession to be retained by one such as I must in future call myself. I would," he said, as the slaves retired, "that, dying as he is, I could exchange conditions with that noble animal." "It is written," answered the Arabian, although the exclamation had not been addressed to him, "that all creatures are fashioned for the service of man, and the master of the earth speaketh folly when he would exchange, in his impatience, his hopes here and to come for the servile condition of an inferior being." "A dog who dies in discharging his duty," said the knight sternly, "is better than a man who survives the desertion of it. Leave me, Hakim. Thou hast on this side of miracle the most wonderful science which man ever possessed, but the wounds of the spirit are beyond thy power." "Not if the patient will explain his calamity, and be guided by the physician," said Adonbec el Hakim. "Know then," said Sir Kenneth, "since thou art so importunate, that last night the banner of England was displayed from this mound. I was its appointed guardian. Morning is now breaking. There lies the broken banner spear. The standard itself is lost, and here I sit a living man." "How?" said El Hakim, examining him. "Thy armour is whole, there is no blood on thy weapons, and report speaks thee one unlikely to return thus from fight. Thou hast been trained from thy post ay, trained by the rosy cheek and black eye of one of those houris, to whom you Nazarenes vow rather such service as is due to Allah than such love as may lawfully be rendered to forms of clay like our own. It has been thus assuredly, for so hath man ever fallen, ever since the days of Sultan Adam." "And if it were so, physician," said Sir Kenneth sullenly, "what remedy?" "Knowledge is the parent of power," said El Hakim, "as valour supplies strength. Listen to me. Man is not a tree, bound to one spot of earth, nor is he framed to cling to one bare rock, like the scarce animated shellfish. Thine own Christian writings command thee, when persecuted in one city, to flee to another; and we Moslem also know that Mohammed, the prophet of Allah, driven forth from the holy city of Mecca, found his refuge and his helpmates at Medina." "And what does this concern me?" said the Scot. "Much," answered the physician. "Even the sage flies the tempest which he cannot control. Use thy speed, therefore, and fly from the vengeance of Richard to the shadow of Saladin's victorious banner." "I might indeed hide my dishonour," said Sir Kenneth ironically, "in a camp of infidel heathens, where the very phrase is unknown. But had I not better partake more fully in their reproach? Does not thy advice stretch so far as to recommend me to take the turban? Methinks I want but apostate to consummate my infamy." "Blaspheme not, Nazarene," said the physician sternly. "Saladin makes no converts to the law of the Prophet, save those on whom its precepts shall work conviction. Open thine eyes to